Good morning, Westchester. It's 9 a.m. on Monday, and that means it's time to talk with me, Jen Graziano. I'm a licensed funeral director who oversees my family's funeral homes, Cox and Graziano of both the Mamaroneck and Greenwich, and the Zion Memorial Chapel of Westchester. Every week, I come to you discussing important topics and sensitive matters that all of us need to pause and reflect upon at some point. And through this show, I hope to provide a platform to do so. If you're joining us on air this morning on 1460 WVOX, we'll take questions, comments, and calls to 914-636-0110. Good morning to the guys in the control room. And good morning, Facebook Live viewers. Thank you so much for joining us on this Monday morning. And hello to Tim behind the camera. So I have the pleasure of talking to a friend of mine this morning, an old friend and fellow Ursuline Koala, year of graduation not to be disclosed. But we're talking about a very sensitive subject that sadly has impacted so many of our children. We're talking about childhood grief, childhood bereavement, and also kind of a general overview of what she's witnessed through her position during this past year and a half of the pandemic. I'm speaking with Anne-Marie Conlan, the director of the Bereavement Center of Westchester, well known for its Treehouse Program. So good morning, Anne-Marie.
Good morning, Jen.
Thank you so much for coming back. We had you on a while ago, but I think it's a subject that it's very near and dear to me because of what I do in my line of work. You always see that children handle it differently. And it's so easy to go unnoticed because their grief is not necessarily an outward manifestation of tears and visible sadness. It gets masked in many different forms. So it's so important to get children help in the aftermath of any type of grief or loss or death or really any major change in a child's life. It's so important to monitor them and get them the appropriate help. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Can you tell us a bit about the Bereavement Center of Westchester? Where is it located? What do you cover there? Any information?
Yeah, so the Bereavement Center now it reached its 25th year last year. So
wow.
We've been around for over 25 years now. We are located in Scarsdale. But it was an idea that came out with the help of the Bronxville Junior League and a few good-hearted people who realized that children, they were working in hospice, and they realized that children don't grieve like adults do. And they saw these young families coming in, and then they would die, and there would be hospice around, and then nothing for them after. So that's kind of where the germ for the Treehouse originated. So the Treehouse Program, we have two different locations, Mount Kisco and Bronxville.
Okay.
And it is for children ages 4 to 18 who've had a parent or sibling die.
Okay.
It's a family bereavement program, so the children go into their age-designated groups from age 4 all the way up to teens. And then their guardians or surviving parent either go into a child loss group or a spouse partner loss group.
I mean, it just makes so much sense on so many levels. And, you always see that too. In the immediate aftermath of loss, everybody's around you. Everybody's there. Everybody's helping. And I always remember my dad saying the hardest day is the day after the funeral, when life has to kind of go back into some type of routine or some type of normalcy, and yet nothing is normal. So kids go from having all this support around them physically, everyone's at the house, everyone's bringing food, and then it's hard for them to slip back into their world. What do you think, it's obviously age specific, so from your 4 to 7-year-olds, your 7 to 10-year-olds, as you get into teenagers, it obviously, grief manifests in different ways. What do you think some of the telltale signs of childhood grief issues for younger kids versus older kids from your perspective?
Well, a few different things. I mean, one, if just as adults, grief is very unique, right? There's no, it's very linear. It's very fluid. So there's no, like this is how you grieve and this is how you grieve specifically. But it does really matter, like developmentally, and also the support system that the child has around them. One of the determinants for healthy grieving for a child is if their parent or caregiver is getting support, which is so important that the Treehouse has the component for adult support.
It makes so much sense because you can't help a child. It's like the whole theory of put your mask on the plane and then put it on your child. If you're not if you're not helping yourself, you're not going to be able to address the child's issues, and they're also going to feed off of your energy as well.
Absolutely. So children grieve. They grieve. We call them grief bursts. So they can't sit with sadness like we can.
Mm-hmm.
We can kind of like have that prolonged, sadness, guilt. Their feelings just kind of, pop in and out. And then it does, change over time. We kind of say, a child who loses someone significant early on, grieves for life. For example, I had a mother call me a few weeks ago. Her husband had died when her daughter was 2. Mm-hmm. And so her older son was in the program, but her daughter wasn't. And now the daughter's 4. And at nighttime, every night she cries out for her father, and what's happening is she's now cognizant of, the kids at school who have fathers, right?
Absolutely.
So it's all just, now, she's processing it on a different, level than when she was 2, and then, she'll do it differently when she's 8. So, and that's particularly difficult for the parent because they kind of feel like they kind of, wrapped up that conversation.
Right.
And then, it comes back full force, and it's like this, opening of a...
Oh, yeah, it reopens the wound, but there's so many triggers that are age appropriate, like you said. I mean, and it never goes away. I mean, no matter what age. I think if you've lost somebody you love, you do grieve for life in different ways. I think you function. But there are always triggers. There's always something that's going to open up the wound. So having healthy tools to deal with it, the earlier you can build that foundation, the stronger the house is going to be down the road. So it's very important to let people out there listening today, I think, again, if you have a child that did deal with early on grief, don't be surprised if the need arises down the road to revisit and to get help again. Do you find that some people are just so quick to get done with their grief work that they just want to wrap it up and not realize like the possibility of coming back in the future?
I think it's more what the cues they're getting from other people around them to wrap it up. Mm-hmm. One of the things that definitely gets me is if I ever hear someone say, they have to move on, or we always say we move forward, because you never move on from a loss.
You don't.
Move forward, and we're always trying to achieve the balance between grieving and living. When someone first dies, it's this acute grief that you're feeling. The rawness, the intense emotions, and through time it transitions into just grief that's there, and sometimes it gets re-triggered. But you're just finding a balance between, the living and the grieving. And one of the things we work on, in our grief counseling is integrating the person into your life. You knew how to love them when they were here, but now how do you continue to love them when they're not here? And how do you, bring them into your life still? And that's really important for children especially. That's
so interesting. And it makes so much sense to hear that because, grief is an outward expression of love, and I honestly do believe that love moves on. You don't stop loving somebody because they're not physically here. But you're right. It has to be kind of a reintroduction to them, and I can see very easily how people get stuck in that guilt of going forward. I like your term, moving forward, not moving on. So many issues, though, that arise from this, and you can see if you don't address them properly, it's just going to lead to so many other complications down the road. Mm-hmm. Do people, when kids stay with you young, do they usually continue throughout 18? Do they graduate from your program? Do you do any recognition when their time has come to a close? Or do you, through the Bereavement Center, forward them on to more adult-centered bereavement therapy?
So there's no time limit for the program. Typically, families do stay, a year to 2 years.
Okay.
And then sometimes they do, come back, or I get a lot of calls, especially this past year, because definitely the pandemic, kind of really, was a trigger for.
Yeah, probably reopened anxiety, and then that was a question I was going to ask you. I'm glad you segued there. Everything that you've been trained or you've learned or that through experience must have just flown out the window in the past year. What, from your perspective, are you seeing heightened levels of anxiety in kids? Do you see a lot of return families coming back? Has the pandemic reopened a lot of wounds for people?
Absolutely. I'll get a lot of calls of, this is going on with my child, this is going on with my teen. I don't know if is it grief, is it, you know, the pandemic, right? And so, and how do we really separate, you know, because it is all meshed together. And, you know, this definitely, you know, picture, you know, one of the biggest feelings when someone dies that you experience is isolation, even if you have a lot of people around you.
Absolutely.
Grief is something that we do, you know, internally. And so now, you know, this past year, you know, one of the things that, you know, helps with our grieving process is a support system, right? And, you know, everyone that was hard to find this year. You didn't have face-to-face. You know, your support system had their own losses. So, you know, it definitely reopened things. People didn't have those the access to supports, and also just normal schedules, school, work.
Yeah, you couldn't fall back into any form of normalcy. There was none. And even, you know, the immediate aftermath of death changed so much when, in the beginning, when you weren't able to gather and have a wake. So, and I never use the word closure because I don't believe that's a real thing. But there's a process to it, and part of that process is the immediate surrounding that everybody comes to you. So much of that was lost. So I'm sure for any death that was experienced during this time, it's going to be a different course of grief therapy for so many people.
Right. So we have these rituals for a reason. Right. We have funerals, we have memorial service, whatever your cultural beliefs and religious beliefs are. We have these, you know, set rituals, and because it's that's the way we work through the process. So when that was stripped away, that was actually not having these, you know, ability to gather was a secondary loss.
Absolutely. That's
and
a good way to put it.
Yeah. So now we're really seeing, and also, you know, it's kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If your primary focus is your physical health, and, you know, there's these threats around you, and you're just trying, you know, or financial issues, you're not really getting to the grief.
Yeah, you're just trying to survive in your day to day.
Yeah. So now as things start to, you know, come out a little bit, we're going to see people really addressing their grief.
So like a delayed response to grief. Right. And I always say, and I know with Terry, who works with us in bereavement, you have to deal with your grief at some point, or it deals with you. She always says that. Right. So you can put it off, and you could, you know, go into survival mode, which everybody does, but it will find you at some point. So again, the overarching message of today is to deal with it somehow, some way, some form, whatever works best for you, but to enlist some type of support, because there's no way, if you've, you know, lost a spouse, lost a parent, lost a child, there's no way you can go on never addressing it. I want to talk a bit more, though, about the Bereavement Center itself. Are there any fees for the program? How does it work to become part of the program? And how do people get involved in philanthropy for the program? Because I'm sure it does rely heavily on donations.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Treehouse Program, we are so grateful that we are able to offer it free of charge to families. And that is because of generous donations that we get from, you know, the community fund in Bronxville, Eastchester, Tuckahoe, and just, you know, then individual donors. And so that, you know, we have different events, which obviously this year we were unable to have. So our development team worked hard to do, you know, virtual events and different campaigns. So, you know, anyone who wants to donate, definitely give us a call, or, you know, go to our website, bcwtreehouse.org. And we have to, you know, it's not just our Treehouse program. We also have individual counseling, which there is a small fee for individual counseling. And then we have loss-specific groups. We have a loss for after suicide. We have perinatal loss group. We have a child loss group for, you know, adult children who have died. And then another spouse loss group as well.
Do you find that dividing the groups is important? I mean, is it possible to really find the healing and the comfort in a general bereavement group? Do you find that specific breakdowns help? Because although grief is a very individual process, it's like a fingerprint, no two are alike, but there's probably some comfort in knowing that these people are walking parallel paths. Right. So do you advocate separating by situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think any bereavement support is wonderful, but if you are able to break it down, you know, a few of the determinants of your grieving process is, you know, the relationship to the person. Okay. Also, you know, the cause of death, right? So, you know, if we have, you know, so specifically suicide, right? You know, that's going to bring up different, you know, different areas that you want to address, right? And then also the relationship to the person who died.
So you do some school outreach as well. What does the Bereavement Center do in the schools, and have you been able to do it during the past year?
Yeah, we've actually been very busy with school outreach. So, every year we offer an annual training for anyone who works in a school. It's a 3-hour training, and it's really just to work on how do you handle grief when it comes to your school. It doesn't happen on when you want it to. It can happen on a Sunday. It can happen So what do you do when it happens? Because even though grief, we always say it's not an emergency. The emergency is really over, but it feels like it, especially when you're in school and you want to support the community. You want to get the information out, and everyone's kind of just stopped in their tracks. So we help them. We'll help them come up with a letter to the parents, how to talk to the students. We say that we help the helpers. Mm-hmm. So we go in and we support the staff to support the children and the families.
Do you ever do school specific programs, or in the schools is your work more to help the helpers, as you said, or do you get to connect to the kids directly?
It's more to help the helpers. Kids really, especially when someone dies, they don't want some strangers really, to talk to. Who do they want? They want people who make them feel safe and familiar. So we really, arm the staff with the tools to do that. I've been involved with the Mamaroneck District crisis team since the pandemic started last year, and just that's been a wonderful opportunity to help my community because schools didn't know how to respond to this. And one of the things that happened with the pandemic is they thought it was as if this was new, and grief has never been we've been grieving since we've been living, right?
It certainly shed more light on it, that it's real though. Right. And it's sad that it took that, because grief is often like an unrecognized ailment. It could yield physical effects on you. It wrecks your emotional and mental health, and it's often people don't really give it its due credit for the havoc it can wreak on a person. So unfortunately, this is not the way you wanted light to be shed on it, but perhaps if there's a silver lining, if it could be found at all, is that we're paying more attention to emotional and mental health.
Right, it's at the forefront now. And just going back to your question about kids before, we always say that we grieve in character. That's for adults and kids. So oftentimes I'll have parents say, my kid's not talking about their feelings, and I'll say, well, do they usually talk about their feelings? Take like a 13-year-old boy. I had a parent once call and say, all he wants to do is play video games. He's not talking about his father dying. What did he do before? He played video games, right? So, that's if you weren't, if your go-to emotion is anger, if your go-to emotions, to isolate, that's how you're going to.
You probably just double down on who, right. On what your go-to really is, and that's a good tip for people out there listening and watching. To take a step back and kind of understand your child and understand, this behavior probably mimics their normal behavior. So while yes, it still needs help and needs to be addressed, but you're right, that's probably something that could put a mother at ease to know that it's not a changed behavior, it's just, a double down grief response.
And with this, I think that the one thing to always remember with someone who's grieving, you can't fix it. Mm-hmm. And especially when it's your child. If your child has a stomach flu, you want to fix that, right? So now imagine they're grieving, but you can't fix it. You can just support it. You can listen. You can be there. And it's hard to watch your child in pain.
Oh my God, absolutely. And it's our nature. It's our propensity to want to fix everything, and we can't. Anne-Marie, I wanted to ask you, and I know from my professional perspective, the amount of younger deaths is alarming. Drug-related, opioid-related, experimental drug use at one time where they took something that was laced with something. It's eye-opening, it's alarming, it's frightening. From your perspective, have you recognized over the past, let's say, decade, like a rise in youth drug-related deaths, and have you witnessed kind of the teenage response to that? How do you handle that from your perspective of bringing education in, or just supporting teenagers through that grief of loss of a peer?
A few years back, we were getting a lot of calls from schools, really, I think, at the height of it. Mm-hmm. And, part of, one of the things that affects the grieving process is, the type of loss and the cause of death. Mm-hmm. And with that is the shame, right? So, the drug, suicide, unfortunately, brings, this component of shame, which is difficult when now, you're trying to grieve and again, now I'm talking more about, the parents and the family members. But, for teens, it's, again, just supporting them. And what we always do is we kind of, obviously the cause of death is important, but then we take it off that and we put the focus on who was the person who died.
Okay.
And maybe less on the facts and kind of the crime scene.
Less on the how and more on the who, right? Like who they were. It's just an alarming trend that we're witnessing, and you always hope that maybe it would be channeled in a way that scares kids into a better reality and to make better choices. But nonetheless, it's a grief that has to be addressed, because I'm sure teenagers, like you said, they're not always the most vocal group, and the world today is so different than even when we were teenagers, which is kind of crazy how different things are. But social media, isolation, there's so many things that make teenage grief increasingly complicated.
Right, and teens are, as children, teens should be developmentally, they're narcissistic, right? So
right.
It's just they're in their own world with it too. So we just kind of have to open it up and let them know that we're there for them.
Do you find that there's a bond that's formed between groups in your that you watch? I mean, everyone's going through it together, separately but together. So I'm sure there are friendships that get formed, and people stay on and communicate and kind of support each other independently of the program. I'm sure you watch that quite a bit.
I think that's one of the most beautiful things about the program, is because you have these kids who, outside of the Treehouse probably wouldn't even really interact at school, right? All from different, circles and backgrounds, and they come together, and it's, like, oh, your mom died? Oh, your dad died?
Bonded by circumstance, by sad circumstance.
Yeah, and because, when you're a child, you can feel like you're the only one who's had someone die. It can be very isolating. So the Treehouse exists so that you don't feel so alone.
Right.
And that's just, if that's what we're giving them, it's the most powerful thing we can do. It's just not, no one wants to feel alone. In this past year, definitely loneliness has been, for everyone, whether you're grieving or not. There are all these losses. So to not feel so alone is what we give to them.
Absolutely, so important. So you said that you had physical locations in southern Westchester and northern Westchester, correct? You said Scarsdale and...
Right, so we have a Treehouse location in Bronxville and Mount Kisco.
Okay.
So
for the Treehouse program, the qualification is the child between the ages of 4 and 18 lost a parent or sibling.
Yes.
Correct? Okay. And then, but there are so many other programs that people can take advantage of for spousal partner loss, adult child loss. Any other types of programs that you can think of out there that might pique the interest of listeners or viewers?
Yeah, I mean, we get calls of any loss, death related to, an organization, a company, if someone dies.
Okay.
Again, obviously I mentioned school.
Yep.
I mentioned the perinatal. We are forming a COVID loss specific group.
Oh, okay. That's really good to know.
Yeah.
Really good to know. So it's an incredible resource. And I encourage anybody out there listening today or watching to learn more. What is the website, Anne-Marie, that people can go?
It's bcwtreehouse.org.
bcwtreehouse.org. And is there a phone number associated?
Yeah. So 914-787-6158. And again, it's the Bereavement Center of Westchester.
Are there any a general message that you want to leave, or any general tips that you want to share with listeners or viewers today about dealing with childhood grief specifically?
Just to really listen to them and to support them, and to just we always say it's kids need structure, and they need people who make them feel safe and loved around them. So just giving them that ability to get back to some structure with flexibility, and to just be surrounded by and be patient with them.
Yeah, no, that's so true. Structure with flexibility, I like that. And again, making sure that you as a parent are getting help is only going to help them. So some people might be reluctant to say they don't have time, or they'll put all the focus on the kid. But if you're not doing that matching component to get help for yourself, you're really not helping your child as best you can. So a wonderful component, again, that your kids, so you could be together, then you break off into separate groups.
Right.
That's such a wonderful resource. And There are donation opportunities, I'm sure, on the website and ways to find out about events. Anything upcoming virtually or anything upcoming that...
No, we're kind of still, waiting for things to shake out a little bit. And then, hopefully in the fall.
Are you meeting in person right now? Are these groups meeting in person?
No, we are still virtual, and the next month, individual counseling and our other groups will get back in person.
That's great
The
to know.
Treehouse runs from September through May.
Okay.
So we'll meet up in September. And all anyone has to do is just call.
That's great. 914-787-6158, bcwtreehouse.org. Thank you so much, Anne-Marie.
Thank you, Jen.
This is a sad topic, but such a necessary topic because people need to know the resources available to them. And like we said, you have to deal with your grief at some point.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you very much. And this is Jen Graziano thanking you for taking the time to listen as we took the time to talk. Have a great day, Westchester. Bye-bye.